Good morning, YouTube. Welcome back to Bravo 22's live channel. Welcome to our new viewers and welcome back to all our old regulars. I'll do shout outs in a little while. My name is Luke. I've been a Bravo member since 2015. I appeared in the play Contact, got the poster just over here. That was my introduction to acting and the stage, and also had the opportunity to appear in a show called Unspoken. We toured the country and performed at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which was absolutely fantastic. I loved it. So love Bravo and all the work that they do. So what is Bravo 22 Live? Well, we bring top quality artists sharing their insights into all different aspects of the creative arts, be it acting, comedy, storytelling, art. Storytelling's today, obviously. So, we're bringing people straight from their front room into yours. So, tell all your military friends, all the military community, share it on your social media, get them to come along and join in and tune in and watch our workshops and broadcasts. Please ask questions in the chat box. We have like over 200 subscribers and we want to get to 250. So the more people, the merrier. Share it around. So as I said, please ask questions in the chat box. We'll try and get through as many of the questions as possible during our session. So I've told you about what we have had. Over the next month, we've got our first text in performance. So we're really excited about that. Off the back of our successful film series. So stay tuned for that next month. So coming to today's session, as I mentioned, we have storytelling. We have Dublin-born performance storyteller, writer and trainer. She's made a living as a storyteller since 2006. She's traveled to more than 20 different countries, performed in 2 different languages. She also teaches all kinds of people like me to tell their stories better. So, please welcome none other than Clare Murphy. Good morning, Clare.
Good morning, Luke. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Great to see you again.
Yes, you as well. I think we started a little late this morning, did we? We had a few technical difficulties. Hopefully we've got all the people over to our side of the chat, pulled all the people from the internet into our little room. And there they are. They're out there. Hello, people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you see them all? There's quite a few. Hi. It's lovely to be here. Yeah, you do the head count there, Luke. Yeah, get them to turn their phones off. It's very different, isn't it? Very different here to share a room. But we know you're out there. With storytelling, you see, we're used to the live, the body with all the bodies in the space. And it's my favourite way to perform. But we'll get stuck into this. So welcome to the Secret Powers of Storytelling. I have been working as a storyteller for 14 years. It has been my honour and pleasure and privilege to do that and travel around the world and tell stories. But what I find funny, Luke, is like when I met you, I was introduced to you as a storyteller. And whenever I am introduced or someone asks me what I do, there's a look of shock and confusion because nobody knows it's an actual job. You know, exactly. Excellent look of shock there. Nobody knows it's an actual job. And they think, they ask me, oh, are you a writer? And I say, no. They say, are you a filmmaker? I say, no, I'm a storyteller. And they say, but what's that? And I say, well, I stand on stage and or on a beach or on a footpath or in someone's house or in a volcanic river. I tell stories. And people can't really understand that because I'm not very old. I mean, I'm old enough, 44, but people expect a storyteller to be sort of, grey-haired and hunched and wrapped in a blanket with a pipe and a cup of tea or something like this. So I am delighted that Bravo 22 invited storytelling into this forum because storytelling is really important in human relations in general. It's important out there in the world, but I think all the Bravo 22 people can use that skill set in what they want to do. So let's get stuck into the secret powers of storytelling. And I know that on YouTube you can post any questions you want. We're really happy to hear them. And Luke will ping them over to me whenever he sees one. So whenever I chat with actors and they say, well, how do you do what you do? And one of the first things I've learned to say is that we don't have a script. So I don't I don't memorize stories before I get on stage and then recite them as if I was reading them from a book. In fact, for me, that would kill a story. And actors get a little stunned by this, because of course the script is how you navigate your way through a film or a play or whatever. But for storytellers, there's no fourth wall. So I can always see you, Luke, and I'm always watching your face, and I'm always looking at your reactions, and I'm looking at the room, and I'm thinking about if people are comfortable or cold or hot, or if I'm in a community that's just been through something. Like I was in California right after the huge forest fires, and it was one of those things where I can acknowledge that on stage and have that reaction with the audience. Not working to a script leaves me a huge amount of freedom to respond in the moment. The other way it frees me up is when things go wrong. So I don't know if you've ever had this, Luke, 'cause I know you've told your story a lot in public, but things like a phone going off, or a dog barking, or a police siren, or someone getting up from the front row to run from the room and go outside to vomit, which did happen during one of my storytelling sessions. And it wasn't anything I'd done. They did have a stomach bug. But the idea being that because I'm not stuck to a script, I can fold in whatever is happening into what's going on stage. So step one of the secret powers of storytelling is don't tie yourself to a script. Free yourself from it. And there's little tips and tricks I can give you later on which will help you not get lost during a story. But the first thing would be let go of the words. The second thing I want to say about storytelling is the reason why it works so well is because they say, evolutionary biologists say, that human beings have been telling stories for 100,000 years. So far longer than writing, far longer than drawing. And the reason why that is so exciting to me is because it means that we have had time for our brains to develop to understand the world through story. So there are neurological connections in the brain that mean when we arrive into the world, we're waiting to understand through the medium of story. So if you want to create something really powerful, if you're trying to get across a message, like let's say you're an environmentalist, or let's say you're trying to change the way people think about food or whatever, if you wrap that in a really good story, people will remember it. So becoming an effective storyteller, or becoming more effective at telling stories, means that you will improve the way your message is landing in the world, whatever message that is. So the other thing about storytelling is that it embeds knowledge into memory far faster than anything else. And I read this book on storytelling called Story Proof long after I became a storyteller. And every chapter that I read is by a guy called Kendall Haven. I had a story to support the theory that he was talking about. So I went to a school up in Letterfrack, Connemara, and they brought me up there once a year, Luke, to tell stories to all the kids. Now I got there, it was the first week of September, and they said, Claire, do you want to go in and tell stories to the little kids? Now these kids have just arrived, so they're 4. They're 4 years old. They've been in school 2 days. They don't really know anything. They don't know how to sit in their chair. They don't really know who the teacher is. If you keep them entertained for 15 minutes, doing well. Yeah, that's fine. And I went into the room and I sat down with them, and they're all tiny, like 4-year-olds are like drunk adults, basically. They're just stumbling around trying to make sense of the world. And so I told them story after story after story, and they sat there for 45 minutes. And then I finished, I went and I told stories to all the kids. But I came back a year later, same time of year, to do the day of storytelling. And as I walked into that tiny little school, I suddenly felt this pair of eyes on me. And I turned, and there was a 5-year-old down the far end of the corridor, and she'd spotted me, and she came running towards me. And she said, "You're the storyteller." Now this is my only moment of fame, right? Because this is who I want to be famous with, this 4-year-old. And I said, "Yeah, I am." And she said, "You told me the story of the wide-mouthed frog." And I said, "Yeah, I did." And then, Luke, she proceeded to tell me the whole story that I had told her once, 365 days before, when she was 4 years old and could barely remember how to sit in a chair. So for me, that absolutely nailed it to the wall, that if you want to do something powerful, use story to do it. So listen, I can talk all day. I better check in and see. Have you had any questions coming in on the chat box?
We've had a response about what is storytelling. This is from Stevie. Stories are used to connect with others, the audience, to take the audience to new places and learn, to make them think and maybe inspire them to change. So yeah, very well thought out answer, I think.
I love that, Stevie, and you're exactly right. And so I came across this great quote by Zimmerman years ago. He said, storytelling is the cheapest form of time and space travel. No passport, no security check. So Stevie's right. You absolutely take your audience and you go on this journey. And what's lovely about it is you don't need anything other than these three things. So you need a story, you need a listener or multiple listeners, and you need the storyteller. And that sounds obvious. Really importantly, and this is something you and I have worked on a lot, which is those three things have to be in balance. So you have to love your story, you have to love your audience, and being fully present, being fully yourself when you're telling the story really, really helps. So using that sort of triangle, it's worth keeping that in mind. So you need to make sure that the story you tell is appropriate to your audience, that it suits them. So you don't tell a children's story to adults, you don't tell an adult story to children, but also the storyteller is so charismatic and energetic and gregarious that we spend more time looking at the storyteller than listening to the story. So for our performers out there, keep that triangle in mind, that the relationship between those three things should be equal at all times.
Okay,
what else?
So we do have some questions. Right, so let me just have a quick scroll. If you don't use a script, Claire, do you have any techniques to help you memorize the stories? That's from Phil.
From Phil, yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I often train people on is the idea of creating a map of your story. So for those of you out there who are listening, think about a story that you know really well, like a story from your childhood, let's say a fairy tale of some kind, like Jack and the Beanstalk or Cinderella or something like that. The quickest way to do it is to do it with another person and have to tell them about it, because we're here on YouTube. So just write out the bullet points of things that have to happen for that story to make sense. So that's not all the description, it's not getting involved in all the detail. It's Jack has to live alone with his mother, he sells the cow for 3 beans, he plants the beans and gets a beanstalk, he goes to the giant's land, he steals from the giant follows him, he cuts down the beanstalk and kills the giant. And that's what I call the bones of the story. And they're the markers on the map that you have to know so that you don't get lost. And once you know those, if you've got 2 minutes or 20 minutes, you'll never get lost in your story. So I always walk through the story before I tell it. I always rehearse it. I warm up the story, but not verbatim. And then I'm free to respond, but I know where I'm going at all times. So my best advice there is build a map and look over your map, even if you think you know your story really well, because stress and anxiety before you speak does a lot to the mind, and there's a lot going on. And if you don't allow yourself the not the luxury, but if you don't allow yourself to warm up and really understand the story as live and awake, then you're underestimating how much it takes to perform or tell a story live. So respect the story by warming it up.
So a question from Sally. Were the first stories not drawn on cave walls?
Wow. I mean, I wasn't around. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't around 30 to 60,000 years ago when they were drawing those cave paintings. I'm utterly fascinated by them. But if we look at the oldest stories that I know about in the world would be the Aboriginal Australian stories, and the native Australians have been there for, we think, at least 60,000 years, and their stories go back that far. So they have been telling and singing their stories for that long. Paintings go back that far, but but the evolutionary biologists are saying that the stories were around for longer, which makes sense. But I mean, this is the thing. There's no real way to know what was going on 100,000 years ago. But when I spend time with a story like Gilgamesh, which is about 5,000 years old, you can see how other cultures, like the Australian culture, had similar elements in their stories. So I reckon that stories have been around for longer. But drawing and story could have happened at the same time.
Okay, so we're going to do some shout outs. We haven't done any of those yet. So we've got tuned in. We have Kate, Steve, Dean, Sally, Graham, Kay Cook, Ian Rudge, Paul. So there's a whole host of people, and sorry for those that we didn't mention, but welcome anyway. Stevie would like to know if you know the story of the Hound of Ulster.
Oh, sure, look. How could I not? I mean, yes, of course, is the answer. I mean, the Hound of Ulster is Cuchulainn, and Cuchulainn is one of the big Irish heroes. So in Ireland, we're told mythology when we're 5, and we're told about 6 key stories. One is how Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster, got his name. Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth, the children of Lir. So yes, the answer for Stevie is yes, I do know the story. And most Irish people are told those stories from a young age, which would explain why we are the way we are, so full of drama and madness and wonder. Because our mythology is very close to who we are. And it's very interesting for anybody watching who doesn't know their own mythology, be they English or Welsh or Scottish or wherever you're from. It's really worth looking into the mythology of the place where you are and the place where you're from to get a sense of the root of your culture.
Fantastic.
So, Luke, I think I might tell a quick story. Oh, go on.
Oh, okay. Yep. I was going to just ask a quick question from Jill before you do that. Does Claire tell her own stories or ones that are already written?
So 95% of the stories I tell already exist. And that's because I tell from what's called the traditional canon. And these are stories in the public domain that are open for anyone to tell because they were made by the people for the people. So that means myths, folk tales, legends, fables, and anecdotes. That's what I tell. And I tell them because they've been around for anything from 100 to 50,000 years. And I love telling those stories. I do tell stories that I create myself, but I'll tell you this, Luke, I don't tell people this very often, is that I don't tell people when it's a story I've made myself. I just make it sound like an old story so people think it's an old story. So there's 2 or 3 hidden in my repertoire that are actually mine, but I've slipped them into the public domain, and I know for a fact that they're out traveling the world and people are telling them thinking they're an old story, and that's my little bit of subterfuge there. So
nice. So you were just about to tell a story, Claire.
I was thinking of telling a story, yeah, and obviously I don't have time to tell the Hound of Ulster because we've only got 30 minutes, so I just thought I'd tell something else. So once there was a farmer, and she had a small plot of land but no water. So in order to feed her animals and to feed her plants, she would have to take the great long stick, and at the end of the stick were 2 clay pots, and she would carry that on her shoulder. She would walk the mile down to the well, and she would fill up her pots and she would carry them back, and then she would water all the chickens and the pigs and the plants, and she did that every day. Well, one day as she took the pots off and she sat at the table, she heard this crying noise, and she was alone. She heard it again and she turned, and it was the pot, Luke. The pot was talking, and it was saying, "Please destroy me." She was saying, "What?" I mean, look, this was back in the day when pots could talk, but still she was a bit surprised. And she said, "What?" And the pot said, "Please, you have to destroy me." The farmer said, "Why would I destroy you?" "I know," said the pot, "but do you see my brother Pot over there? He is perfect. He is absolutely perfect. You fill him with water, and when you get back here, he's still full of water. But me, I'm imperfect. There is a crack running down the side. You can't see it because it's so small, but every day, water seeps out. And I am only 3/4 full. So every day I fail you. So you must destroy me. And the farmer, she thought for a moment. She said, do you ever look at the path that we walk? The pot said, no. The farmer said, oh, I do. Every day we walk down and the pots, you're both empty. But on the way back, because of that little crack, you see water. Because of that water, wildflowers grow, all colours. And every day that is the bit of beauty I get to see. If you weren't imperfect, I wouldn't get the flowers. So you see, I will not destroy you. Sinead Scale, that is my story.
Thank you very much. Very good, very good.
So that's an old folk tale, and it's attributed to all kinds of places. You'll find it anywhere online. It's called The Cracked Pot, or many other names. But I wanted to put that out there because I want to set our listeners a little task, and that is this: take that story and tell it. Tell it, preferably today, maybe in the next 3 days, preferably to another human being, not a wall or a dog. And see what happens to it. You might find that the story changes slightly. You might find that you said it in Birmingham instead of on a farm in China, where I said it. But this is the way it is when you want to work with story. You start with a story and you see what happens.
Chinese whispers, right?
Over to you. Mm-hmm.
So we have a question here from Graham. How important do you think it is to describe details when telling stories, such as giving sights, smells, and environments?
That's a brilliant question, Graham. I think it's really important to set the scene. And it's one of the tips I would give you, which is if you see it, we see it. So you'll often hear someone tell a story. If you find yourself switching off, it's because they haven't engaged your senses. That's often one of the reasons why. There are many reasons why we switch off listening to a storyteller if they haven't done the work. But by engaging the senses, you start to switch on all the areas of the brain. I give you like err on the side of caution, which is if you over describe everything. She walked into the room and the room was painted a pale yellow as a primrose, but a primrose in the spring, but in the first day of spring, as if it had just opened. The room was that kind of yellow. And there was and you see already now your eyes have glazed over, Luke, because there's too much detail. So there's detail, and then there's killing your audience with detail. And then there's so little detail that nobody can see anything. So with storytelling, it's about that fine line between keeping people engaged, but leaving enough room for their imaginations to paint the picture. Because what's happening in storytelling is cinema of the mind. So while I talk, your mind creates image after image after image. So if I over describe, I rob you of that.
It's like reading a book, isn't it? When you create it in your mind and then you see the film of the book and you think, that wasn't as good.
Yeah. Yeah, your mind is by far the most powerful creative force that I've ever come across. So I have to... no, not yours particularly, Luke. I think you could use a bit of work. No, I'm just kidding. Well, I mean, it is though, the human mind, and that's what cinema and theatre and everything is trying to gain access to. But actually there is nothing quite as powerful as our own imaginations. And it's a cliche that's thrown around a lot. But the reason why I know it so well is because what happens when I tell stories. So I'll show you if you want. I'll just show you here what happens. So when I tell this happened the first time I told a story and I thought there was something weird. And then it happened the second time. And then the third, and I got used to it. And now I know what it is, so now I enjoy it. But this is what you, my beloved audience, look like when you listen to a story. Now I'm speaking directly to the adults, not children, because children start like this. But adults start like this. And then as the story goes on, this is what happens. And I'm not making fun of you, but that is actually really beautiful because you're totally relaxed. The jaw relaxes, the eyes go wide, the body slumps, right? And I get to the end of the story and the audience goes, because you've forgotten where you are for a moment. And I've had so many people come up, and it's not me. I've had other storytellers say the same happens for them. It's not the storyteller, it's the act of listening to a story. The audience has contact with their imagination, and it might be the first time in years, Luke. I mean, you and I both work creatively all the time. You know, you work with film and story, I'm working with storytelling and composition. So we're almost weekly or daily engaged with our imaginations. But there are people out there who haven't engaged with their imagination because TV does all the work for you, film does all the work for you. They feel that. When they feel the brain light up in that way, it gives you this jolt. I mean, it gives you oxytocin, dopamine, cortisol, serotonin. It gives you a wonderful elixir in the brain. But it gives you this reminder of what it felt like to be a kid when your imagination was always switched on, which is why I think the act of co-creation in storytelling is one of the most empowering acts of art that can be done.
We have another question. This one's from Ian. And he wants to know if you write down a particularly good story, or how do you remember it?
That's brilliant question. So it's different for each story, Ian. So the old Irish myths, I read them again and again and again because they're so complex and there's always more. Now, I did not actually prepare to have this here, but it happens to be here. But what I do, Ian, is I have a storybook every year. And if there's a story I love and I find in one of my books, I read it. And I read it again if I need to. And then what I do is I prepare the bones. And I write out the bones in bullet points. And because I just read that story, the bones are too long. So the more I know a story, the bones get easier to read. They might be just bullet points. And I write it down, I keep it in my storybook, and then I try and tell it as quickly as possible because it's the telling of it that logs it into my memory. So I might call you up, Luke, or I might call up Neris, or I might call up my mom or my friends and go, I need to try out a story. And I try it out, and then it goes into my short-term memory and then into my long-term memory. So if I were you, Ian, I would keep a storybook, and stories will find you. They won't necessarily be folktales and myths like me. It might be a story from the news. It might be a story from your life. It might be a piece of history. But if there's something in that where you go, oh, this is really powerful, you will know it's powerful if it affects you deeply. If you're not that entertained, don't keep it. So you have to be moved as a storyteller if you want to move your audience. So keep a storybook handy and collect it if it moves you, and you can figure out later what to do with it.
I've got a question, Claire, before we have to wrap up. One more question, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I've noticed that while you're talking to the camera, there's a lot of gesticulation and body language and all this kind of thing. Do you do that exactly the same on stage as well as on screen?
No, I've been on quite a journey the last 4 months to figure out what this is. Because this is a very small space. And in this space, you can't do as much. Or on stage, I'm quite physical, and I love that, and that's my way. It's not everybody's way. But here, I have to obey the laws of this medium. So right now, I'm forcing my hands up into the frame if I want to use them, so that you can see them. Otherwise, they'd be here, and you'd be wondering what I was doing with my hands. So I've had to learn how to cheat and use this space and play with it and know where the camera is. And that has been quite a learning curve, which is why I haven't posted a lot of story videos yet, because I'm trying to figure out how you do it.
Well, take it from me, Claire. I think you're doing amazingly well. The way you use that space is really good. Keep it up. You'll be a good storyteller one day.
Thanks, Lou.
So I'd just like to wrap up now by saying thank you to Claire, as I'm sure everybody else would. And thank you to everybody that's here today watching. Thanks for taking part. Thanks for your questions. In the description below, please to check it out. Look for resources for storytelling. There's also a feedback form. We would love your feedback so you can tell us how to keep the standards high, the Bravo 22 standards. We want to know what we can do better. So yeah, please get on that and fill it in. We'll be back on Bravo 22 live on Thursday at 11, continuing the Art Masterpiece series. with Al Johnson and Sharon Enderwick. We'll be discussing a masterpiece by Lowry. So until then, thank you very much and goodbye.